Well, it's 7:30, and some of us are met to listen to Roger. Roger White, who's part of our alternative home group. We've asked him to repeat his walk about the place. I'll read what I've written down here because I'm losing my place here. He's going to recall the remarkable people he met and places he saw when he took his pilgrimage trail across northern Spain, known as the Camino de Santiago. He took a little stroll of about 500 miles, it's not a lot. He will take us over mountains, hills and plains and through cities, towns and villages, all of their own churches and their living heritage. Also, we are very grateful to Simon Large, for his helping to show all the pictures on the screen up here, and which will accompany Roger's talk. There will be plenty of opportunity for any questions and discussions at the end. So no questions in the middle, but ask as many as you like afterwards. Okay, so without further ado, I'll ask Roger to come forward and he will start the talk. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome this evening, and particularly to those of you here on a cold winter evening. And welcome also, and I'm looking to the camera now, to those who are joining us on stream this evening for the live stream. And this evening, it marks the end of the week of prayer for Christian unity, the International Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. And I think it's good timing that I'm now recalling the long walk I took across northern Spain 4 years ago on the Camino de Santiago, the Pilgrim's way to Santiago de Compostela. And first, what is this Camino de Santiago? Well, Camino is Spanish for way or road, and Santiago, Saint, Iago, James, the way of St. James. And James, as we know from the Gospels, was apostle of Jesus Christ. And from the Acts of the Apostles, we know that he was beheaded by order of Herod, and that was in AD 44. So, and it was in Jerusalem. So where is the Spanish link? Well, it is said, without the same historical evidence, that James had been in Spain on mission, spreading the gospel, and that after he was beheaded, his body was brought back to Spain by boat. Then, nearly 800 years later, in around 813 AD, a hermit found a tomb, and it was agreed that that tomb was the tomb of St. James. And the cathedral, as we know it today, the cathedral at Santiago de Compostela is built around the tomb. And pilgrimage there has continued on and off ever since. And there's been a great resurgence of pilgrimage in recent years. This French map, Simon, could we dull the lights a bit, because I think it will be easier for people to see the screen. Thank you. This French map shows the old medieval pilgrimage routes through Europe to Santiago. And it's like a railway map with all lines leading to Santiago. And you can even see a sea route from Plymouth. And sadly, that has long since closed. But the routes from Europe are coming together in that red line across northern Spain. And that is the great Camino Frances, the Camino from France. And the Camino Frances was and still is by far the most trodden of the routes to Santiago. And it's the Camino Frances that has the most extraordinary heritage of pilgrimage. And it's rich in what I would call spirit of place. We're closing in now on the Camino Frances, and I've added yellow arrows so that you can see the beginning, which is at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the French side of the frontier with Spain. And then it goes over the Pyrenees through a variety of landscapes, sceneries, towns and cities, and a couple more mountain ranges before finally reaching Santiago. And the distance, as John was saying, is 800 kilometers or 500 miles. And a little further on the coast, just beyond Finisterre, I have marked a red dot where the Cape of Finisterre is. And I shall be coming to that later on, but you can see there where Finisterre is. And pilgrims join the Camino at different places. Many just for the last 100 kilometers into Santiago, because that qualifies them to get a certificate of having walked the Camino when they arrive at the cathedral in Santiago. Many are coming from further back, and some are in groups, some, as I was, on their own. And there's no right or wrong about this. It's each to their own choice, and that's, I think, some of the joy of the Camino. The one thing that everyone has in common is taking the way to Santiago. Turning to my own Camino, after my wife Diana died, I wanted to do something special, and I was in Spain, and it was then I had the idea that I would walk all the way from France. My plans were scuppered when hardly had I decided, but I injured my Achilles tendon. And after 2 or 3 years of treatment and false starts, I finally felt that the tendon was just strong enough to give it a try. And in the words of Rudyard Kipling, it's time to turn on the old trail, our own trail, the out trail. Pull out on the long trail, the trail that is always new. I cleared my diary, packed my rucksack, took a one-way flight to Biarritz with a minibus connection to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And here I'm in the main street of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, the Rue de la Citadelle, and the gateway at the bottom leads on to the Pyrenees and Spain. In the words of Lao Tzu, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and I was taking my own first step on the Camino de Santiago. I stayed at this rather charming converted farmhouse just a couple of hours above Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and the other guests here I'm with, just finishing our dinner in the evening, and you can see through the window the clouds are gathering and getting heavier, and the weather forecast was absolutely awful, and the advice on the weather forecast was don't go up into the high level in the Pyrenees. And the others around the table here all went back down to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port after breakfast in the morning. I felt that we were still on the tarmac road at this point, that I wasn't going to turn back without at least having a look-see. And I was absolutely delighted because I thought I would be entirely on my own, coming out to find others who had set off earlier from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And I was joining others who, like-minded, were giving it a go. And this was my introduction to the remarkable goodwill and greetings along the Camino. Up on a plateau in the Pyrenees here, you can see I'm pretty windswept. It could be the Brecon Beacons, except the sheep are slightly different. Now, That is me. I'm not in the Antarctic, but this is a driving rainstorm just at the crossing, the frontier crossing between France and Spain. And you can vaguely make out on the left side of the picture the markings on the stone for the border. But although it was filthy weather, the marking was easy and the walking quite easy, just an awful lot of climbing up over the Pyrenees. And to give some idea of scale, the height from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to the Col de l'Hypodée, before one drops down into Spain, is 3 times the climb from Story Arms up to the top of Penavan. Now, down on the Spanish side at Roncesvalles, Santiago de Compostela, 790 kilometers. Well, I'm making a bit of progress, and the Camino path is going off on that path going off into the woods on the right. And you can see there the sign saying that I'm leaving Roncesvalles and also Arriaga. And I asked, where is this place, Arriaga? I've come into it, I'm now leaving it. I was told it's the Basque name for Roncesvalles. And so just as in Wales, we have the Welsh names and the English names, so in the Basque country, we have the Basque names and the Spanish names. Now, looking west, moving away from the Pyrenees, but still very hilly country, beautiful walking here in the province of Navarra. I had been a little late leaving Roncesvalles, and I dropped down into a village where I was on my own. I went into a cafe for lunch, and when I came out, there were some men who had gathered in the square outside the cafe, as you often find on the continent, men gathering in the village square. And they looked round and saw me, and they smiled and said, "Buen Camino, have a good Camino." I just found that very uplifting. And now, a few days on, the weather has improved enormously, and it actually remained pretty good all the way to Santiago. And this is an old medieval bridge into Pamplona. It's wonderful for pilgrims because the nature of the old bridge is it's too narrow for traffic, and it's got that hump in the middle. And it's a very lovely bridge, and there are bridges like this over the streams as one goes along. Now, coming up from Pamplona, which is to the left of centre, below the hill there. By the way, it's clear on the screen, is it? The lighting's okay, yeah. I had in mind stopping for a day in the lovely old city of Pamplona, but I felt now I'd got the momentum going, and so I didn't. And interestingly, I was talking to someone else who had felt exactly the same. And here, you can see the people coming up to the Alto del Perdón, and that is the beautiful wrought iron monument to medieval pilgrims, some on foot, some on horseback, some with a donkey. And that was erected in 1996. A close-up there of 2 of the pilgrims with their dog. And the inscription reads, "Where the way of the stars crosses, where the way of the wind crosses the way of the stars." I'd set off well before dawn in order to arrive at this lovely church of Unati, to see the sun rising with the beautiful, rich colour on the lovely church. It's an interesting shape, the octagonal shape there, which is based on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and as are several of the churches along the Camino, coming from the Knights Templar, who had come from Jerusalem and over to northern Spain. And by the way, just over our own border in Herefordshire, if you've been to Garway, there's a remote church there where beside the existing church, there are the foundations of an old Knights Templar church, which would have been rather like this. And you can see in the shade in front of the hedge, that's my rucksack. And in the middle of the rucksack, the white disc is a scallop shell. And the scallop shell is the symbol of the Camino, because in medieval days, pilgrims took back a scallop shell from Santiago to show that they had been there. Today, one buys the scallop shell before setting off, and it's a token, and practically all the pilgrims wear the scallop shell, and it's a very good conversation opener. You know that you're with someone who's taking the same way. Approaching the village of Abanus. Like many villages, it's built on the slightly higher ground, and in the center, it's crowned by its church. If you wonder, can that possibly mean what it seems to mean? The answer is yes, it can, it does. Fountain of wine. And it goes back to the 12th century monastery of Iraqi, where the monks would provide hospitality for pilgrims passing through. And I'm very glad to be able to tell you that that tradition has been kept going in the modern commercial Burgos Iraqi. And here is Claire from Chichester, raising her scallop shell with wine and raising the toast of Bien Camino. And you can see over Claire's shoulders, those are the two taps serving wine for passing pilgrims. Wonderful idea. Look carefully at this picture. It's on the left, Neve, on the right, Tom, and they are from Kilkenny in Ireland, and they're walking about a week of the Camino. And do you see their hands, their wrists are tied by a piece of cord, and Tom's stick, that's not a walking stick. No, Tom is totally blind. He had an industrial accident when he was 19, and I walked with Tom and I asked him how he was finding it. He said, wonderful, having a wonderful time along the Camino. It made me feel very humble. But a cast-off boot makes rather a charming flower pot. I looked around to see if the other boot was anywhere there. No, couldn't see any other boot, but it really rather nice idea. And it's on a post, which itself is a sign for the Camino. And the symbol there of the scallop shell, you can see, and below the scallop shell is the yellow arrow. And those yellow arrows are wonderful. They're not bright or fluorescent or anything. They're quite discreet, but sometimes on a pavement, sometimes on a wall, and sometimes, like here, on a post. And you can walk for a mile or two without seeing a yellow arrow, but whenever there's a choice of paths or a turning in a town, the arrow will be there. And it makes the route finding really quite easy. One develops an eye for the arrows. Here, a stream of pilgrims approaching the town of Sanson. And I think it's fascinating. The people along the way, they're different nationalities, men and women, and different ages, different backgrounds, and different reasons for walking the Camino, but all with the common sense of purpose of walking on to Camino de Santiago, to Santiago de Compostela. It's a remarkable feeling. Another church here, at Torres del Rio. And it's a similar shape for the same reason as at Unati. And the door was open, and I went in as I normally did if a door was open, and sometimes just to spend a couple of minutes, sometimes rather longer, in the churches. And I think that's why I felt very strongly at the time of the restrictions with COVID that we should keep our churches open. And I felt privileged to serve as a steward in St. Edmunds here during the lockdown. People were coming into the church here at Torres del Rio and standing in the center and then going out again. And I asked a lady attendant, what's going on? And she said to me, some people find a surge of new energy when they stand in the center of the church. Well, I sounded a bit unlikely to me, but I wasn't averse to a bit of new energy. So I stood in the center, and I didn't feel new energy. What I did feel was an extraordinary sense of peace. I was just enveloped in this feeling of peace. In the words of Paul's letter to the Philippians, the peace of God, which passes all understanding. And any doubts I'd had about whether I was sensible to be walking the Camino were dispelled. And from then on, I knew that I was going to walk on to Santiago. And as I was going up the hill, leaving the church, I was in a bit of a daze. I heard shouting behind me, and I looked round, and there was a chap had come out of the church. He had spotted I'd left my hat behind. So he was waving my hat, and I went back to collect my hat. The ground getting much drier now, very healthy-looking cattle, but certainly drier than it was when I left the Pyrenees. Here, on the left, Carmen, who's an environmental scientist in Murcia in the south of Spain. And I was at San Juan de Ortega when I had wanted to stop the night and have a look around the abbey there, but I was told there were no more beds left. And Carmen saw me looking rather dejected and said, cheer up, it's not a very nice place to stay here. Much better place just down the road at Argues. So I went on with Carmen to Argues, and she was absolutely right. And on the right is Sheila, an operating theatre nurse from Saskatoon in Canada. And Sheila told me she had never had any problem finding a bed for the night because she always stopped at 1 o'clock. And I tended to be rather variable in when I stopped because I couldn't resist stopping in places along the way and having a look around. Burgos, the great city of Burgos. On the left is the Arch of Santa Maria going into the old city. And on the right, the statue there is El Cid. Not Charlton Heston, but the real El Cid, who was born in Burgos in 1040 AD. That's Burgos Cathedral, great Gothic masterpiece, and a most beautiful city, Burgos, with plazas and tapas bars and museums and churches. And I stopped for a day in Burgos to have a look around this lovely city. I've now been walking for a couple of weeks, but there's still a bit more than 2 weeks, but there's still more than 300 miles to go to Santiago. The next stretch, though, between Burgos and León is rather easier walking for the most part. Here, El Menino, the old mill. And do you remember 5 years ago, our Lent course was based on the film The Way with Martin Sheen and Martin Sheen and the film crew stayed here in El Menino while they were making the film. And Martin Sheen's grandson was with him for some work experience, Taylor Estevez. And Taylor Estevez fell head over heels in love with the beautiful daughter of the house, and they married. And I'm happy to tell you, to the best of my knowledge, living happily ever after. We're inside here having a drink before our evening dinner, and I think you can see there's a merry atmosphere. We've had a few drinks on the terrace before coming in. It was really a very lovely place here to stay. And just to the left of center of the picture, you can see the poster on the wall, and that's the poster of the way. And on top, the enigmatic caption. You don't choose a life, you live one. A lot of birds along the way. This little stone chat, quite unperturbed when I took out my camera to photograph him. And as I say, a lot of other birds as well. There were vultures swooping low in the Pyrenees. This is looking down on the lovely old town of Castellariz. And you can see from the top of the church tower the trail of the Camino running across the plains, and then as it hits the ridge opposite, it's then climbing leftwards up to the top of that ridge. And that ridge is actually a plateau. It's a plateau of the Meseta, and the Meseta is a large plateau across northern Spain which has fingers reaching out across the Camino. The following morning, I'd set off at first light, as one did most mornings, making the most of the cool of the morning. And here I'm on top of the Meseta, looking back down to Castellariz, which is just below that hill on the left. And the sun is about to rise on the horizon. I'm looking eastwards. In the words of our Welsh poet, W.H. Davies, "What is this life if full of care we have no time to stand and stare?" Dropping off the Meseta, this church of San Nicolas is on the border of the old kingdoms of Leon and Castile. It was in a rather ruinous state, but this part of it was restored by Italian volunteers, and it's maintained to this day by Italian volunteers. It's very simple, no spire or tower, but rooted in the earth around it, like our Welsh chapels. Inside, very simple, no electricity, just the soft flickering light of the candles. And it was here in this church of St. Nicholas that several years before I had made the decision to walk the Camino. And the candle there in the center was placed there by me. And I spent some time here. But in the words of Robert Frost, I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. This garden is a hostel where pilgrims are relaxing in the last of the afternoon sun, and you can tell it's a hostel because of that clothesline across the back. One of the first things one does arriving, if it's a sunny day, is to wash any clothes that need washing and catch the last of the sun. Here I'm with Kathy from California. Kathy is a management consultant, and Kathy was able to explain to me the workings of a smartphone. I'd bought a smartphone before leaving home without realizing that it would take a bit of getting used to, and I'd been very confused until Kathy explained it all to me. And note the magnificent carving on the stonework there, quite common in the churches, magnificent, beautiful carving. Now, this really is a long, straight stretch. Some people choose to take a bus or a taxi on stretches like this, in this part of the Camino. I'm glad to have walked all of it, because I think it gives one a fuller sense of the whole Camino. Certainly one wouldn't be choosing to go out for an afternoon walk on a stretch like this, but as part of the Camino, yes, it's lovely to have walked it. Here, 4 happy bunnies, myself, Kathy, Andrea and Tony from Nuremberg in Germany. And we're happy bunnies because we've just had our 3rd breakfast of the morning, all before 10 o'clock. And along the Camino, there are very good cafes. And I didn't carry any food. I carried water, but no food except just for a nutrition bar in reserve. And on this occasion, we had been together in a village called Ledigos, and we'd had breakfast before leaving, and then another cafe an hour or so along the line, and we had we thought we would stop there, and now this 3rd one. So stocking up with nutrition. On the left here, Manuel from Brazil, and on the right is Joseph from Belgium. Joseph is a priest and working in West Africa, and he'd come over especially to walk the Camino. The beautiful outline of León Cathedral, soaring up into the sky. It's floodlit here. And I arrived there when they were having an international music festival. You know, sometimes when you're traveling, you happen to be in a place where there happens to be something going on. And here in León, that evening, they were having an organ recital, and the Austrian organist Klaus Lang had come in to play the organ in a very beautiful setting of León Cathedral. And I was fortunate to get a seat for this performance. It was wonderful. I think it may be partly just the sheer relaxation of the Camino. I was carried away with the music, and it was a beautiful evening. The following morning, the sun shining, which enabled me to appreciate the stained glass windows, beautiful stained glass windows in León Cathedral, 125 of them, and it's a most beautiful cathedral. Now, leaving León, I've been walking for 3.5 weeks now. There's still 200 miles to go. 2 mountain ranges, the mountains of León and the Cantabrian Mountains before the final stretch into Santiago. On the left is a particularly beautiful statue of Santiago Peregrino, St. James the Pilgrim. And this is in a village called Mazarif. And there are a lot of images like this along the way. There are paintings in churches and also some statues. And you can, do you see in his left hand, he's holding the gospel, and in his right hand, the pole for walking. And on the top of the pole is the gourd which contains his water. And can you see in the center of his hat, that's the scallop shell, the symbol of the Camino. On the right, I took the picture of that in the museum in Astorga. Very different. Santiago Matamoros, St. James, the Slayer of Moors. And that is going back to the medieval time when the Moors from North Africa had come up, had occupied most of Spain. And from the north, there was then the reconquest of Spain and the image of St. James as the leader on horseback, leading the troops into battle to reconquer Spain. Well, it was successful, but it's an image that I'm very uneasy with, but I show it because it's the other side of the coin. And I'm glad to say there aren't many of these Santiago Matamoros, but there are some along the way, not nearly as many as Santiago Peregrino. Here, Puente de Orbigo, the amazing bridge over the Rio Orbigo. I'm there on a buttress with Kathy. And there are 19 arches. They're all different heights, different widths, and the bridge itself is curving. It's a medieval bridge from the 12th century, but it's actually built on Roman foundations, and it's quite one of the most remarkable bridges I have seen. And you can see pilgrims walking along the bridge, and I think if you look carefully at the pilgrims, you can see how it's the bridge is curving its way. Another hostel, the giveaway sign for that is again the clothesline on the right-hand side at the back of the garden. And this is Rabanal at the foot of the Mountains of Leon. And Rabanal is rather special from a British point of view because it's run by British volunteers. And it has a special feature which you won't find anywhere else on the Camino. And that is that the volunteers, in the afternoon at 4:30, they serve tea to the pilgrims. Now, climbing the mountains of Leon, there is on the right there the Cruz de Ferro, the Iron Cross, and around it is that huge cairn, because the tradition has grown that you bring a stone from your homeland. And here you can see on the left, I'm standing beside the Cruz de Ferro. It's quite an inspiring cross soaring up into the sky. And on the right, I'm placing my own small stone, which I had taken from Cumanefach above Langatok on St. David's Day the same year, and I had carried it with me to place here on this cairn. Very beautiful walking on the ridges of the mountains of Leon. And this was October. I was conscious that this was exactly the same route that General Sir John Moore had taken when he was retreating from Salamanca after Napoleon invaded Spain. And that was December 1808. And I was in October. Gosh, how fortunate I felt, because Sir John Moore's troops had a terrible time with snow and ice and frostbite. And for me, it was just 2 months earlier in the year, it was just perfect walking. This memorial caught my eye because the words are in English. The boat is safer anchored at the port, but that's not the aim of boats. It's a translation from work of Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian. And there are many memorials along the way, people who didn't make it. In this case, though, I looked up, I Googled, and found that Michael Cura had been on a cycling trip on the Camino with boys from his school in Swansea. And this was just the year before I was walking the Camino in 2016. And he had collapsed and died here on this spot. And I don't know if any of you or anyone on live stream is aware of this story, but it was only just 5 years ago. And I think it's very fine that his parents chose such a very positive message to put on the tomb. The boat is safer anchored in the port, but that is not the aim of boats. Dropping off the Mountains of Léon, beautiful village down there, Osabiro, where I stopped for the night, and beyond you can see the valley, and in the distance the Cantabrian mountains. Very lovely walking through the hills. And now down in the valley, the town of Ponfarada. Here, a 12th century castle built by the Knights Templar. A lovely last of the sunset shining on the walls. And in the distance, you can see the Cantabrian mountains, still 2 days' walk away. Coming up into the hills, I couldn't resist taking this lovely picture of the watermill with the hills behind. And now in Osabiro, which is a hilltop village, I'm being greeted here by Savannah and Ronja from Sweden. And they're smiling because it's a very happy occasion to meet again. I had seen them 2 days previously when they had actually just set off on their own Camino doing the final parts of it. And Savannah was suffering badly from blisters, and I was able to help her with some first aid, and I gave her some Compeed and advised her to go back down and find better fitting footwear. And she had done just that, and they'd taken a shortcut. And here they were in Osabiro. It's the nature of the Camino. You see people, and then you see them again, and sometimes weeks later, and sometimes you don't see people again. And that is the church at Osabiro, a very beautiful old church. It's a 9th century church. It's the oldest church still standing on the Camino. And a very lovely church it is too, inside as well as outside. And in a niche beside the church is this bust of Don Elias Valina San Pedro. And Don Elias was the priest here in the 1980s. And he had a vision for the Camino. And after General Franco died in 1975, and Spain was released from the dictatorship, he visited all the communities along the way of the Camino and set in hand the painting of the yellow arrows to mark an agreed route for the Camino. Don Elias died in 1989, but what a wonderful legacy he left behind him. Now, leaving the Cantabrian mountains, there are many beautiful statues like this. I mean, that just catches the pilgrim bowed into the wind. And if looking down, if you think you can see the sea there, no, it's not. It's just mist down in the valley. The sea is still quite a bit further away. Now, down below in the old town, there's some lovely towns along the way. This is Melide, and I'm with Kathy eating octopus. Galicia, it's the province of Galicia, is wonderful for its seafood. And in particular in Melide, they pride themselves on being the finest place in Europe to eat octopus. I don't know, but it was a pleasant meal, and the not only is a good seafood there, but the Albarino white wine goes extraordinarily well with the fish. Now, on the Monte de Gozo, the Mount of Joy, above Santiago, two pilgrims here, the statues, are raising their hands in joy to look down to Santiago. Santiago was actually covered in mist when I was there. The sun was on the top of the hill, but it was misty down below. And I had been walking for 6 weeks, and I felt I was going well, and I thought I would realize a secret wish, which was to go on a little further, to go on to Finistere. And in the words of Robert Louis Stevenson, to travel hopefully is a better thing than to arrive. But first, I had a day in Santiago, and the highlight of the Camino is the Pilgrims' Mass, which is held in Santiago Cathedral twice a day in the season, and it's absolutely packed. And a spectacle of the Mass is swinging the urn, which you see in the center there. That huge brass urn is actually an incense burner. It's called the Botfimero. And the Botfimero is as large as it is because it is said that, particularly in medieval days, it needed to be large to overcome the pong of the unwashed pilgrims. And you can see there are 8 strong men there in dark clothes, and it is they who pull the ropes to swing the Botfimero. And on the left there you see it beginning its swing, and on the right up into the rafters of the transept of the church. It's an extraordinary spectacle. Now, I'm 3 days out of Santiago. You can see that it has been raining heavily. The yellow arrow there, again the yellow arrow, this is the Camino Finistere. It's actually pointing to Finisterre. It's the only Camino route where the arrows are pointing away from Santiago. And that's because it is regarded as an extension of any Camino into Santiago. And the significance is that on the coastline near Finisterre is where it is said that the body of St. James was brought ashore. And I remember as a boy, when we would listen to the news on the old BBC Home Service, and before the news there was a shipping forecast, and the shipping forecast had this litany of romantic-sounding names: Rockall, Malin, Dogger, Finisterre, almost always finishing with Finisterre. And I had no idea where Finisterre was until, walking the Camino, I found it's actually just beyond Santiago. And so the draw of Finisterre was very, very strong. And Finisterre is actually Finisterre, the end of the earth. And in medieval times, it was the end of the known world. And before that, Neolithic and Celtic people would come to Finisterre to watch the sun setting over the Atlantic Ocean. And also, for me, it was hugely attractive to complete the crossing of Spain and to finish my pilgrimage in the great outdoors. So here the path is leading on, and that gap is, and you can see it has been raining heavily. That gap is leading to the bay at Finisterre. And I was walking rather harder than I would have chosen, because there was now a brief gap in the storms, but there was forecast of further stormy weather coming in and off the Atlantic. Here's the view of the headland at Finistere. The town itself, I was expecting a charming little fishing port. It's actually sprawled quite a lot with modern development. There's still a charming centre to it, but I pressed straight on to the headland. And do you see the ocean is quite calm, but the water around Cape Finisterre is very rough with swirling currents. And this is called in Spanish the Costa del Morte, the coast of death, because so many boats have been shipwrecked and people drowned on this coast. And here is the lighthouse, which has saved many lives, the lighthouse on Cape Finisterre, the westernmost lighthouse in Europe, built in 1853. And beside the lighthouse is this peace pole erected by the World Peace Prayer Society. And it has a message which I think is a very fitting epilogue for the Camino. May peace prevail on earth. And by chance, I was, just before COVID, I was in India, and I was thrilled to see a similar peace pole outside a Buddhist temple in Darjeeling. It's a custom to burn old clothes as a symbol of throwing off the old life at the end of the Camino. The day trippers have left now, and the coaches have gone. Just a few of us staying on the headland to watch the sun setting. Here in the fading light, I'm with Nada from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And Nada is in the center of my next and final picture, watching the last of the sunset. The sun is actually setting behind a deep bank of clouds which a few hours later were to be a driving storm over Finisterre with heavy rain that continued through the night and into the next morning, but just now was the calm before the storm. The end of the day at the end of the earth and the end of my own pilgrimage trail. Thank you. I shall be happy to take any questions. If you want to just stand up and stretch for a moment, do. I'll be happy to take questions. It can only be from people here. On live stream, it's not possible, so you'll be able to hear the questions and answers, but you can't shriek, no, that's wrong. We'll just pause a moment. That was water I was drinking. The Albino white wine will wait till I get home. I have some open. So, does anyone have any questions? Oh, I should say that Marwin will bring a microphone. That's so that people watching on live stream will be able to hear the questions.
I just wanted to tell you, I belong to St. Mary's.
Let's just wait for the microphone. Yeah. So, there we are.
Oh, right. I just wanted to tell you I belong to St. Mary's in Abergavenny. And we had a chat. We had a man who came and told us about the walk. But the thing that I was going to tell you is the shell that they used at the baptismal is from there. It's from Santiago, the shell that you spoke of.
Yes.
That's the one they use at the baptismal of all the children in Abergavenny.
Oh, how lovely, how lovely.
Isn't
Yes,
that lovely?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
when I first went there 15 years ago, I thought, well, fancy them just, why haven't they got a silver thing? But not, it's a proper shell. And then someone did, I think it's Father Jeremy brought it back with him before he departed to be the dean and then passed upwards and onwards. Yeah, most interesting
thank you.
talk. Yes. You didn't actually show us the church.
A big one?
You didn't actually show us the church when you actually went into
The church, no, you're quite right. The church actually was covered in scaffolding. They were doing major repair. It's now finished, and I should think very, very beautiful. It's an extraordinary structure, but it was covered in scaffolding, and so no, I didn't show that. I do have photographs, but I had to select, and the picture I have, it's not very interesting because it's more scaffolding than church.
They've got those beautiful walls, haven't they?
Yes. Yes, it's a remarkable cathedral because on the main West End facade, it's a medieval cathedral, but it's a Georgian facade that has been built in front of it. So you've got a total change of style. I was planning in, where are we, year before last now, at the beginning of COVID, I was planning to go not on the same Camino Frances, but I was thinking of maybe the Portuguese route going up from Porto or another route in from Oviedo. But then COVID came down and I doubt it. I would love to go back. One does get older and more infirm with the passing years, and COVID doesn't help. You're right, it is so much in the mind. Yes, that is absolutely right. And some people in the early part of the Camino give up. Perfectly fit people can give up. They've just taken on more than they realized. And a lot of it is actually having that desire to, determination to do it. It's not painful, but it can be, but it does need to keep going when one's not used to it, day after day. It does need a certain determination. Yes, Marvin.
Can I actually ask, why is walking the Camino like that, how is it different? How is it spiritually different from walking the Brecon Beacons, say?
From walking?
The Brecon Beacons, say.
It's very different. There's a sense of the spiritual presence of pilgrims who have walked before along the Camino. One is walking it day after day, and I think one advantage of walking it as a whole, as I did, is you do become immersed in it. You feel part of the Camino is part of you. Some people, working people, may take, I met several taking 2 weeks off and doing it over 3 years. Wonderful to do that, and that takes a determination as well. But what you're missing, I think, coming back into it, it will take a day or two to become absorbed in it. But it's very difficult to describe the sense of spiritual presence. And I don't mean it's there all the time. In a sense, it is there all the time, but a lot of the walking, one is just walking. But there are times when it is very different, and I hope I was able to convey a little bit about that in my own account.
Roger, I just wondered if you could identify, or if you knew at the time what was the most special part of that.
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
I just wondered whether there was a very special part of the actual pilgrimage that you took away with you, or was there something that really, really spoke to you?
I think without doubt the most special time was in the church of Torres del Rio, where I described this extraordinary sense of peace. And I don't know how long I was standing there in the center of the church. I really don't know. I was just separate, as it were. I looked around. I mean, when I sort of came to and wondered, is anyone still here? And the attendants on the door were still there. They were talking to themselves, so no one had noticed me, as it were. The lady who had suggested I try standing in the center had gone. I didn't see her. I wanted to thank her. So that was the most remarkable experience, but there were a number of others as well. And I mean, it was very special arriving at Finistere. And also the lovely people I was meeting, and one fell so easily into conversation. I mentioned the scallop shell, and when you saw someone with a scallop shell, you would greet them, bien camino, and it's somehow not, instead of just a sort of formal exchange, and where are you from, and where did you start, and how far are you going? And I mean, very early on, I remember a couple of lads from Germany, and I said, where are you from? And they said, Stuttgart in Germany. And where did you start? Stuttgart in Germany. I felt very small, having only started at St. Jean-Pierre-de-Port.
Any more questions?
Right, there's only one question I want to ask, and that is, how far is it from Santiago to, I forgot the name of it,
Finistere.
Finisterre.
50 miles. It's just over, it's 55 miles. And I thought, having walked 500, what's another 50? It's a lot. I mean, it's a funny thing, but somehow the adrenaline running to get to Santiago it wasn't quite as strong. And also it may be because I did mention I was walking a bit faster than I would have chosen in order to get to Finisterre before that storm broke.
How did your ankle stand, your Achilles stand up?
Do you know, it was wonderful. And after that experience in the church at Torres del Rio, I thought I'm going to reach Santiago, whatever, and if I'm limping with my Achilles tendon, so be it. But actually, I had no more trouble from it, because it had been walking over the Pyrenees. I had been walking very carefully, and on steep bits, I'd been avoiding flexing my right foot. So I was doing all the flexing on my left foot, and it was quite slippery in places because of the rain, and I was walking with great care, and I didn't slip at all. And it gradually got stronger. And after that experience at Torres del Rio, no more problem.
Okay today?
Yeah.
Okay, since no more questions, well, I just thank you, Roger, for such a brilliant talk there. I did see your talk when we did it way before the lockdown, and I have to admit, it was very refreshing to see it all over again, because I forgot a lot of it. So that was good. Well, thank you for all of you coming. This is Burns night as well, as you said. So all I've got to say, if we say goodbye now by just saying the grace to each other, then I will call the evening to a close. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the Son of God, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be with us all, evermore. Amen. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.